What's up YouTube? Welcome to today's video, and as you can see in this video, I'm actually playing Overwatch for the first time. Now the reason I was playing Overwatch was because this is actually a game that I actually have really liked in the past, and yeah, and there's actually a lot of interesting similarities I think between Path of Exile 2 and Overwatch 2 that I'm going to go over. And it's kind of a good news thing because Overwatch 2 has been kind of surprisingly successful compared to what most people thought it was going to be. I think a lot of people, when they actually thought about Overwatch 2, they thought it was going to flop completely. And I was definitely of that crowd. So you will see later how that actually pertains to Path of Exile 2. But this game has had a steady decline, Overwatch, because the developers have pretty much neglected the game and they haven't released any new heroes. So anytime you're playing or you're actually doing a hero shooter, you would expect that the game would release more heroes, and when you expect the ARPG, you would expect the ARPG to be releasing more skills and other stuff like that. But Overwatch 2 did release on October 14th, and even though they're completely different genres, there are a ton of similarities from the very start. Both of them were actually released around the exact same day at a convention. So on November 15th, 2019, Path of Exile released or announced Path of Exile 2 I think ExileCon, and then Overwatch 2 was released at BlizzCon on November 1st, 2019. So both games actually got announced on the exact same day. And as I said before, Overwatch 2 actually came out on October 4th, 2022. Now, Overwatch has seen a steady decline over the years, and this game was probably one of the most popular games on Twitch. And these are just Twitch metrics. It's kind of really hard to say exactly what goes into a popularity of a game, especially since Blizzard doesn't really release any sort of numbers for Steam. Now, or similar to Steam numbers, so no one really knows exactly how many concurrent average users are online at Overwatch at a certain time. So the best way to actually measure the metrics is basically just go off how popular it is on Twitch category, even if it's not the most meaningful thing. Now, as I said before, the game has been pretty much steadily declining around the time that they released Overwatch 2 or announced it. You can see it pretty much fell off a cliff. And that's pretty much because they stopped updating the game. They didn't add any new heroes. They didn't really have any more balance updates. And it was pretty much no new heroes for almost 3 years. And this was the last hero that was actually released. And it was actually released on, let's see here, April 14th of 2020. Now, for hero-based shooter and not having any new heroes is a horrible, horrible disaster. As anyone knows, if you play any MOBAs or anything like that, new heroes or champions or legends are what really makes the game more interesting and creates more new metas. Now, Overwatch was abandoned, as I said, because everything went into Overwatch 2. They were trying to make new maps, new heroes, and they also had this new thing with the single-player campaign. So it was pretty much all hands on deck for Overwatch 2 and no hands on deck for the original game. Now, this is pretty similar to PoE. Now, PoE has had the exact same thing been happening. I think at this point, it might be fair to say that more than half of the development team are currently working on PoE 2 compared to PoE 1. Now, PoE 2 is a massive, massive undertaking. I don't think there's any way to deny that. At this point, I think they're saying they're going to try to make 5 new acts altogether. So that's pretty much all new environments, all new tile sets and stuff like that. And I don't really know how many new skills they're going to be adding into the game, but they did showcase the spear footage. And then they also showcase a lot of new boss fights and a lot of new maps. So it's really going to be a completely different game. They did say there's going to be like 18 or 19 new ascendancies. So it's a massive, massive undertaking. Now, even though the ARPG market is much smaller than first-person shooters, Path of Exile has run into an interesting phenomenon, which is it has an enormous difficulty of attracting new players. And this is something that happens a lot when a game gets really, really popular, especially in the genre that it currently is in. Now, most games really reach this breaking point pretty fast, and they don't really grow after a certain point. So this can be seen in like games like Fortnite, in games like Apex, and maybe even World of Warcraft, where they peak, and then they're never really able to grow anymore. Now, the reason behind the growth is a lot of different things, right? So you have the market is too saturated. So everyone who likes playing an ARPG has already played Path of Exile or have tried it in the past. And that's pretty much as many people as you're ever going to get. Or it could be just the new players who want to try out the game and they actually do like ARPGs. They try it out, they die in Act 1, or they look at the passive skill tree, or they try to play the game and it's just too complicated and too unforgiving. And that's also another possibility. Now, another thing that's pretty common, and this is not really the case for PoE, is competition. PoE is a pretty unique game in a popular genre in the sense that it really has no competitors. Like when I say I don't want to play PoE anymore, I want to go try something else, I really have nothing to turn to. Now, the closest thing I could possibly turn to, right, is probably this new game coming out called December, right? This is a new game that's coming out. I'll make a video about this. I did try out the demo a little bit, but this game is kind of like a Diablo Immortal and Lost Ark clone. Now, I do know a lot of people originally thought that Lost Ark was going to be the game that pretty much took over PoE, but those people are just crazy. No idea what they're talking about, because Lost Ark at its heart is a multiplayer MMORPG. Now, the thing about this is that in the future, PoE is going to have competitors. So it is very, very possible that the player base could continue to decrease, or maybe the advent of a new competitor will bring more people into the market and increasing it so that PoE is not at full market saturation. Now, another thing that a lot of people bring up is that when PoE reached its peak, and this was pretty much in January 2021 of Ritual League, and this was the height of PoE, right? Now, the player numbers might have been super high because of coronavirus. Most people were staying at home. And it really comes down to whether you think that number is actually sustainable for the future. So it is possible that PoE has been growing, but since more people are not at home so much and they actually go outside more, it could be that it's harder to actually get that same player peak. And having the same player peak players 3 years down the line does not mean that the game hasn't been growing. It still means that the previous numbers are just unsustainable and anomaly. Now, another thing to note is that ever since Expedition League, something has happened to really change off the player retention rate. Now, I know people don't really like the thing about player retention, but player retention is something that's kind of interesting because it really shows about the health of the game in the long run and how much longevity is in the game when it comes out. And in PoE's case, it's the seasons, right? So we can see right here, ever since Expedition League, the player retention has been really, really bad after like the first 2 or 3 weeks. And it's like a pretty noticeable change, right? It was at 60% roughly, sometimes even like 70% in the past. And now, this is like 2 weeks into the league. I think there's only 43.7% of the players playing. And then Calandra League was all the way down at 39%. Now, I don't think fundamentally the core design of PoE has changed that much, but I do think maybe a lot of it has to do with how PoE is actually probably saving a lot of its changes for PoE 2 in the sense that they're not really working on new leagues as much. And I do think that ever since Expedition League, the new leagues have been pretty low effort. So you have Scourge League where you're literally just entering another zone with some mobs, and then there have this weird, I don't even know what was in the Scourge League. Did they have a passive tree? Like some weird passive tree that you pretty much just allocate all your points into. And then you have Arch Nemesis League, which is a league that was horrible in terms of the UI itemization. And it wasn't very in-depth. Now, Sentinel League was really, really basic, but I do think the Recombinators were a stroke of genius, and they actually somehow lucked into that. But Sentinel League was a very, very simple league too. And Calandra League literally has no depth to it at all. It's pretty much a watered down version of Incursion. Now, if you compare this to like previous leagues in the past, you have Delirium League, you have Metamorph. Metamorph was pretty bad too. And Heist League was a lot more involved too. So it seems like they put more effort into the leagues in the past before. Although we don't really know how much effort they're actually putting into it and how much they're actually saving for PoE 2. We don't really, because like in the end, like with more developers, each league should be more and more complicated, right? Because they have more people, more personnel. And that has been the case a lot of times. Like if you actually look in the past at the very start when you have Onslaught League or something like that, or Torment League or Prophecy League, you can see that PoE has definitely come a long, long way in terms of the temp leagues that they've actually been putting out. Now, what does Overwatch 2 even have to do with all of this? Well, Overwatch 2 was a massive, massive success, and I was actually incredibly surprised. A lot of people do not think that many people would actually come back to Overwatch 2. It has been pretty much a running joke of the community for how bad the game was and the state of the current game. Because if people don't really remember, Well, Overwatch actually won Game of the Year in 2016, right? What even won Game of the Year? 2016 Game of the Year, and it was super super praised, and it literally just fell off a cliff. Now, in terms of the launch for Overwatch 2, I actually tried it out a little bit. It was an actual disastrous launch, probably one of the worst game launches I've played in a long time. It was kind of on par with Ultimatum League launch. I don't know if people remember Ultimatum League, but boy, oh boy, Ultimatum League, I played for 40 hours straight and I barely made it into maps. And that was just a crazy bad start. Now, the game is still massively popular, Overwatch 2. I think right now it's like second or third on Twitch, and it's already the third day. And that's despite all the DDoS attacks. Now, what this means is the power of the number 2 or the number of a sequel. And even though the long term for this success of Overwatch 2 is not really guaranteed, I personally think that it will fizzle out within the first week or so. But it shows you how the relaunch of a near identical game gave new life to it. Like, even though Overwatch and Overwatch 2 look completely identical, the only thing that really changed is like 6 new maps, 3 new heroes, and the fact that it's 5v5 instead of 6v6. You still have a bunch of people playing the game and trying it out because of the number 2. Now, that's a huge, huge thing. Because what does PoE 2 mean? It means that regardless of what happens in the next leagues, or how bad it may be, or how slow paced the game may be, or how much less loot there may be in PoE 1, people will always give Path of Exile 2 a shot because of the number 2. Now, if you told me to look at the screenshot right here and ask me, is this from Path of Exile 1 or Path of Exile 2? And I didn't really have any knowledge, I would probably not really know. Like, yeah, the graphics look a lot better in this version, but I wouldn't really know. Like, if it was a PoE 4.0 with a new like act in the campaign, that could be very well it. I do think the shadows are a lot better in the game. But Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2, to me personally, looks near identical. And that's something that I get a lot. I did stream a little bit of Overwatch. And the number one complaint I had was, is this Overwatch 1.5 or 1.2? What's going on? It looks identical. And I do think that PoE 2 does look very, very identical to PoE 1. I do know that Chris has personally said that they don't like to switch up the UI elements that much, purely because they want people to look at the game and know that it's Path of Exile. Now, I personally believe that GGG will deliver on PoE 2. I don't really know what their vision currently is in terms of what they want to do. If their vision is to slow down the pace of combat, or if their vision is to not have as many monsters on the screen so that the game is more optimized for mobile and consoles. Or the vision is to one day have fully asynchronous trade, or to have less loot drop on the ground, or smart loot. I don't really know what the vision is. All I know is from Overwatch 2 that PoE 2 will be successful in the first weeks, no matter what. It'll be one of the most popular games ever. It'll bring a lot of players that are new to the genre purely because of the power of the number 2 and the power of a sequel. It doesn't matter if the game is not completely different, as long as you have the number 2 or Diablo 4 from 3 to 4. That's all that really matters. People only care about how there's the appearance of a sequel. Now, as I said, I do think a lot of the problems with PoE currently is that the staff is pretty split between PoE 1 and PoE 2. And I do think even if PoE 2 releases and it doesn't do as well, I do think that in the future, since they're going to be having all hands on deck working on the new leagues, I do think that the new leagues will have a bunch of meta-breaking additions like Delirium League. And if you actually think about it, Delirium League actually had so many things that completely changed the meta. You had cluster jewels, you had juicing methods for endgame that revolve around Delirium Orbs of Delimir, you had Simulacrum that was super fun and something to challenge your character. There was just so much stuff that was added to the game. Legion had timeless jewels that added so many possibilities to build. So in the end, even if nothing changes and PoE 2 is bad at the start, at least we'll know that the future leagues of PoE 2 will be amazing, right? But maybe that's just too much hopium. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about it, if you've actually tried out Overwatch 2, and if you think that PoE 2 will be successful at the start. I personally think it will be a slam dunk success, right? But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more mirrors, exalted orbs, and divines than me, and see you next time. Bye!